Welcome to another episode of Seeds of Tomorrow. Today we have with us Nathan Wajsman. He is the Chief Economist of the European Intellectual Property Office, or EUIPO, and he leads a team that conducts essential economic research on the role of intellectual property, IP, in the European economy and studies the impact of IP rights infringement, shedding light on its economic consequences. Good morning, Nathan.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
And in studio with us, we have Francesco Mattina, President of the CPVO. Good morning, Francesco.
Good morning.
During our journey, we tackled various dimensions of CPVR, and we thought it might be useful to have a view from the chief economist of the EUIPO about the economic impact of the PVR. And indeed, you did a study recently on this impact, Nathan.
Yes, indeed. It was a joint study that we published together with the CPVO, looking at the economic contribution, but not only economic contribution of the community plant variety rights system. And we look in that study, which actually is one of the best studies that we have ever done in the area of IP. We look at not only the economic benefits of plant variety rights, but also, for example, benefits to the environment. And we even touch on their contribution to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So it's quite a wide-ranging study.
Indeed, and I suppose that was quite challenging finding the right way to approach these vast fields.
Well, yes, but this is why it was done as a joint study between us and between my team and CPVO, because of course it's true we know how to do economic studies, but we didn't know much about plant variety rights, and so this is the expertise that CPVO brought to the table, and I would say not only CPVO, but actually also CPVO stakeholders who contributed their knowledge. And so just to give you a very small example, let's say the meaty part of the analysis, the central part of the analysis was done by a German consulting firm whose existence I was not even aware of until CPVO made me aware of that. So this is just one example, because of course plant variety rights is a very specialized field, and so it's not something that a regular person would know much about, even somebody like me working in an IP office.
And Nathan, you can elaborate a little bit on the challenges that, in essence, we faced together when we had to establish a methodology, because it was indeed a new approach, a new type of study, and we had lengthy discussion on what would have been the best methodology to reach a reliable conclusion.
Yes, indeed, because of course it's a complex issue, because we first had to make some decisions about which crops to include in the study, for example, and it's always there has to be a compromise between there being 100% complete and having something that's manageable to do. So after much discussion, we decided to focus on the most important crops, which, just speaking from memory, account for well over 80% of agricultural production in the EU. So we decided to focus on on a relatively smaller number of crops that are really the important ones in terms of overall production volume. In addition to that, of course, one of the key elements of the study is you have to estimate resource use in agriculture. You have to estimate output in agriculture. Now, output statistics are more readily available from Eurostat and other sources, but when it comes to resource use, it is more complex. And of course, you have the whole complicated interplay, because what happens with plant breeding innovation. The basic result of that is that you use less resources and you produce more food than the other crops. That's the basic, in a nutshell, the basic fact, the basic benefit. And so when you do that, then many markets are affected. Of course, the prices, the markets for the food products or the agricultural and other products affected change. Because whenever you change supply and demand in a market, prices will change. And but also other markets are affected, both for upstream and downstream products. So those are sectors that that buy, for example, agricultural products and do something with them, food processing as an example, and then those are upstream, and then downstream you have the suppliers to the sector, and also so the suppliers of fertilizer, etc. So there are impacts there as well. And then finally, there is an impact on trade, on EU's trade with the rest of the world. EU, of course, is a major exporter of agricultural and horticultural products, and the changes that I just mentioned also affect our trade position versus the rest of the world. So there are many, many impacts, and you need to have a lot of knowledge, not only of the, let's say, of the economic principles, but also a lot of knowledge of the relevant agricultural and horticultural sectors also. And this is what CPVO brought to the table.
Indeed, it is a very large array of competencies, knowledge, and knowing the right stakeholders in order to ask the right question to the right people, because they hold the data as well.
Yes.
And you mentioned a lot of dimensions. Have you had the opportunity to have a look at also the sustainability of is the system providing something in terms of contributing to the agricultural sector in terms of sustainability and growth? Because you mentioned the EU is a major exporter in this output, but is there any data you were able to find in this respect?
Yes, so maybe just to explain that the basic idea, the way the study was done, is that we looked at the evolution of production in agriculture and horticulture and ornamentals, indeed, in the past 25 years. So the years, to be more precise, the years different between 1995 and 2020, and then we looked at, in the absence of the CPVR system, how would that have looked like in 2020? And then the main conclusion is that we would have had more resource use and lower production. And in terms of the trade position of the EU with the rest of the world, we would, for most of the crops involved, we would still have a surplus, but a smaller surplus than we actually have. And for some crops, and I'm trying to now remember which ones, but for some crops, our position would actually swing from surplus to trade deficit with the rest of the world. I know this was true for ornamentals. This was also true for potatoes, just to mention two examples from memory. So clearly it had an impact. Now, I don't know if by sustainability, if you also refer to environmental, if you use the word in the environmental sense, but of course there, as I already said, we find that in that period, the European agriculture and horticulture used fewer resources. On average, the resource use declined by 0.5% per year, while producing more. So, of course, if you use fewer resources, then you have a smaller environmental impact. And so, what we calculated is that the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in 2020 were equivalent to the entire emissions of countries such as Portugal, Ireland, or Hungary. So the reduction that is due. In fact, the overall reduction was even bigger. Here we are talking about the reduction that we can attribute to plant varieties that are protected through the CPVRs, because that was indeed the focus of the study. So considerable reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and also reduced water use. And that was compared to about 1/3 of the volume of Lake Constance. So really quite significant impact, also positive impact on the environment. And I think maybe when you mention sustainability, there is, of course, another angle which we don't cover explicitly in the study, but it is part of the picture. We all know that we of course want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because of the climate change problem. But the climate change problem is already here. I mean, I live in Spain. We have had this year in 2023, the olive harvest was a disaster because of the heat and the lack of water and so on. And so that will, of course, happen more and more. Even if we meet all the goals in reduction as societies, the climate will change for at least some decades. And so we need this innovation in plant breeding to be able to continue to have agriculture and horticulture in Europe and elsewhere in the world, for that matter. So that's another sustainability contribution. Let's say that plant breeding innovation, some of which is protected by CPVRs, make.
Another angle, Nathan, that you try to measure in the study is the relation between innovation and protection of this innovation and competitiveness of farmers and growers in the EU. So with an eye to international trade market, you have already given some insight on the trade, and we know that this is an international worldwide trade. And what can you say on the competitiveness and contribution of the system to the competitiveness of European farmers and growers?
So as we said, the trade surplus that exists in most crops would be smaller if we did not have this protection. I can try to find the exact numbers, but the bottom line is that it helps European farmers and growers to be more competitive in the international markets, to have this innovation. So that's clearly one positive effect. We can also look at the more pure economic effects for which we do have the figures at hand. So, for example, in terms of we can talk about positive impacts for both the breeders and the growers, right? Because the breeders, of course, are a sector, one of the economic sectors. And what we find in the study is that the annual turnover among the breeders who register community plant variety rights at the CPVO is 35 billion euros per year. And they employ 70,000 people in the European Union. And it is important here to say that we took quite a conservative approach here, because we know that there are some companies that may register CPVRs, but the plant breeding is only a small part of their business. So we excluded those companies from the calculation. We really only included companies where the main business of the company is plant breeding. So it's quite a conservative estimate. And then on the grower side or the farmer side, there is, of course, the contribution to GDP, which we estimate at 13 billion euros per year, resulting from the innovations protected by CPVRs. And that corresponds to 90,000 jobs, additional jobs created in the agricultural sector in the EU. But if we also take into account the indirect effects in the upstream and downstream sectors, then this is doubled by a factor of 10, so that we're talking about a complete total impact of 900,000 jobs.
Nathan, you have done also other studies, such as the impact of IP rights in highly intensive IP industries. And do you find a correlation between those studies and this study in terms of result?
Well, there is a correlation in the sense that yes, CPVRs, just like other IP rights, make a positive contribution to the economy of the EU. So in that sense, it's aligned. From on a purely absolute level, the contribution of CPVRs is smaller than the contribution of, for example, trademarks or patents. But that is not surprising because, of course, the CPVR is a very specialized type of IP right compared to the, let's say, trademarks at the other extreme, which can be applied to almost anything. So that's not surprising. But I think also it's so when comparing the absolute figures, the plant variety rights look like a quote unquote small IP right, but I think it's also important always to keep in mind that of things we talked about before and to think about what is it that we are protecting here. We're protecting innovation in plant breeding, which is a necessity. I mean, we have to eat. So this is so for me, the importance of plant variety rights goes beyond the pure economic figures, even though they are important too, of course. But I think it goes beyond that because of the role in, the role of the food system is so fundamental.
And then you mentioned the fact that even if it's a smaller sector, there is a high degree of specialization. And this is also something that came out of the study where we discovered that the majority of investment comes from SMEs.
Yes, that was for me personally, that was a very, very big eye opener because of course, again, until we did this study, I was a layman when it comes to plant variety rights. I did not know that much about them, and I think, like most people, I had the expectation that it was mainly big companies, the big well-known German American firms that were engaged in this. And so when we actually did the study and looked at who was filing CPVRs, then we found that 93% of the companies, the breeders that register CPVRs are SMEs, and that SMEs between them own 60% of all the CPVRs in force. So the majority of CPVRs are in fact owned by small and medium-sized companies, which was a real eye-opener for me. And really one of the standout results of this study.
So this confirms in a way the trend of the EU member state where SMEs are the backbone of our economy. And also in this field, we find a lot of small and family-run business where they have accumulated in a way a lot of experience and specialization in crops, in niches, where it's important that they continue investing, also taking into consideration that in this sector we have registered the highest percentage of investment of revenues in R&D, more than in other industries. Even we know from empirical data that there is an average of investment of 15 up to 20%, even 22% of the annual turnover in research, and that this research is mainly coming from the private sector.
And a small sector on top of that, because it is quite astonishing that this huge amount of R&D is borne by SMEs.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot before when we were comparing the economic impact of plant variety rights with the other IP rights. One thing that I also meant to mention that I forgot is that when I look at the nature of the plant variety right, it seems to me that all IP rights have to strike a balance between, on the one hand, protecting the innovation or creativity of the inventors or the creators so that they can earn a return on their investment, and on the other, making the fruit of that innovation available to the public, so to speak, right? So that further innovation. This is why when you file a patent, for example, part of the deal is that you have to make the technology public, right? The patent is made public so that other people can invent based on that. And of course, and to me, it seems, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, but it seems to me that plant variety rights make a particularly good balance, strike particularly good balance between these interests of the creators or the inventors, so i.e. the breeders in this case, and the society, the benefit to society. What do I mean by that? There is the flexibility that we have through the farmer's exemption, for example, right? That the farmer, and especially small farmers, are allowed to reuse the seeds that they have grown.
And also the breeder exemption.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes. Exactly. That really provides a. So it seems to me that the way that this IP right is structured really provides a nice incentive for innovation, and but at the same time also benefits the public. So I really think it strikes the balance very well.
And maybe you remember when we analyzed the data, we have seen in any case that there is a rather significant proportion of varieties, especially those that goes into the so-called registration system, meaning agriculture and vegetable that enter the so-called common catalog, you remember. And we saw that there is a good part, a good chunk of these varieties that are not protected by the IP right system for plants, so the PVR system. So I'm saying that because if it is true that the majority of breeders are SMEs, there is also the other side of the coin, and maybe you can tell us something according to your experience, because as we all know, there is a lot to do to get SMEs closer to IP right culture. So to really invest more in IP.
Yeah,
What
this
is your
because
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point, indeed, because we know from all the studies we have done, we know that we know two things. We know that the SMEs that make use of the IP system, and here now I'm talking about all IP rights, that they perform better economically. You know, they grow faster, they hire more people, so they create more of what we want in Europe: jobs and growth, and. So we know that, but on the other hand, we also know that only a small fraction of EU SMEs make use of the IP system. And I'm sure this is true for plant variety rights, just as it's true for other IP rights, that many of the SMEs that produce innovation in plant breeding do not protect that innovation. And what we know from asking SMEs why they do not make use of the IP system, we get different answers. Part of the answer is that they find the system complex, bureaucratic, difficult. They perceive it to be expensive, but also some of them have said to us, look, I can file a trademark or a patent or a registered design or a plant variety rights, but if somebody infringes it, I can't afford to enforce it anyway, because it's expensive. If I have to take somebody to court, I can't afford that. So as IP officers, what we have to do is to try to make the system more accessible to SMEs. And as Francesco knows, we, of course, have the SME program that we are doing in cooperation, and also in cooperation with the European Commission, where we essentially subsidize SMEs in when they file for their IP rights, right? In effect they can apply for what we call it a voucher, but in effect what it is, it's a reduced fee that they have to pay. So we try to make it easier to apply in that way, and then further downstream, we of course also have to try to assist them when we can in enforcing their IP rights, because of course registration of an IP right is only a first step. You have to also be able to enforce it, otherwise it's not worth very much.
So enforcement, or the perception of the challenges linked to enforcement, are still a factor that brings SME far from protecting their IP asset.
Yes.
And would you say that in times of economic crisis, because we are still facing a lot of challenges, we are still with geopolitical conflicts very close to us, inflation, energy crisis, etc., would you say from your perspective of economist that in times of crisis, IP investment should not decrease.
Yes.
And because I have the impression that companies, if they have to cut, they may start cutting their IP.
Yes,
among other things.
Sure, that is of course.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I mean, this is very true, as you say. I mean, for some companies, it is tempting to do that, to cut investment in IP and in other things that may not bring an immediate return, because of course the return on IP investment is not immediate, right? It's something that takes a bit of time, but it is important to maintain it, and especially in times of crisis, yes, because at some point the crisis will be over, and then you need to have your new products and services. Now I'm speaking more generally, but this applies also to plant variety rice. So yes, indeed, it's quite short-sighted to do that. It's tempting for some companies to do that, but it is really a short-sighted policy.
Okay, and the SME Fund, you mentioned already the SME Fund. So yes, indeed, we try to promote it as much as we can, and we are rather successful this year with more resources from the European Commission, also for breeding companies in the EU. And what is your, do you know if in the EU IPO for trademarks, I guess you finished the program. I mean, I don't know if you have some latest statistics on it.
Well, I know that as far as I know, the program is still running for trademarks and designs, but it has been put on pause for patents because it was so successful that they have put it on hold for the time being. I stress put on hold, not cancelled. So it's simply good to be able to catch up with the backlog, I think. So yeah, it is quite successful, and and the key thing for us, what we're seeing is that many of the SMEs that make use of this SME fund are SMEs that have not filed any IP rights before. So really, we are we're getting a significant proportion of first-time filers. Which is always important, because whenever you have this kind of program, what you want to avoid, so to speak, is to have companies that would have filed the IP right anyway, making use of the program, right? Because if they were going to file anyway, then they don't need the subsidy. The idea is to try to reach out to the companies that have not made use of the IP system before. So we're quite happy to see that.
Yeah, this is very important, and eventually to make it stable, and it is not just one shot and then next year they abandon, and maybe this can trigger an education process by way they are able to put a value on their IP right in terms of business.
Indeed. So I think part of it is this concrete support, and other part is simply to continue to reach out, to educate, to publish studies. I mean, that's my little contribution, of course, but not just to publish studies, but to actually make use of the results to spread the knowledge, and to make people and companies aware of the benefit of protecting their IP.
You mentioned before the misconception that enforcing is something that it is not at the level of a small holder, an SME.
Right.
It's too complex, it's too costly, it's too uncertain, the result of a litigation, etc. Did you quantify in other IP areas the economics of infringement? So how much does it cost infringement, and how much revenue generate in other areas? Because
Yeah.
I know that you have conducted this kind of studies in other sector of IP.
Yes, we have. So, for example, yes, I can give the example of trademark infringement. There we have done a series of studies together with the OECD, and we estimate, and specifically what we do together with the OECD is to look at the international trade in counterfeit goods. So these are goods that infringe trademarks typically, can be designs as well, but it's mostly trademarks. And that volume is huge. If we look at it from an European Union point of view, then imports into the EU of fakes from third countries amount to 120 billion euros a year, or 5.8% of total EU imports. So it's something that is really on a large scale. And yes, this is of course not SME specific, but still, if we want to zero in on the small and medium-sized companies, then we did another study with the OECD where we looked at what happens to SMEs whose IP rights are infringed. So basically, we took a sample of SMEs who reported having had their IP rights infringed, and then we looked at what happened with their survival rates, in fact, in subsequent years. And what we found is that SMEs whose IP rights had been infringed had a significantly lower chance of surviving the subsequent 5 years after the infringement. So the impact can be actually quite dramatic.
Would you say that we could think of a follow-up study for plant variety rights to quantify the economic impact of the infringement, so the damage to the whole sector and therefore to the competitiveness of the EU? Because at the end of the day, if we weaken the sector, also the competitiveness of our innovators will lose.
Yes, I think indeed that for me, one could of course study infringement also and the impact of infringement of plant variety rights. The difficult part, as always with this kind of studies, to get the data to work with. So with the OECD studies I mentioned before, they're based on data from customs detentions that we have. So data would be an issue, but I think also it's plant variety rights are have such a positive impact. I think it's really more interesting in a way to study, like you just mentioned, competitiveness of the EU. So what kind, to maybe look more in detail at the positive contribution that CPVRs or PVRs make to the European economy. Both are important, of course.
Nathan, I was thinking, you just mentioned it. The economic importance and the public. Do you think that in the public eye there is enough of PVR, or better said?
No.
Okay.
No, very, very sure. Look, I will use myself as an example. As I said before, until we started working on this study together, which we did sometime in 2021, I think. I mean, it was published in the spring of 2022. So until I had really started working on this study and thereby learning about the plant variety rights in general and community plant variety rights in particular, I knew very little about them. And also, as I said before, one of the real eye-openers of this study for me was to see how big a portion of these rights are held by SMEs, small and medium-sized companies. And I think this is really a message that is important to get out to the general public. There are multifaceted messages, but one is precisely this, that to combat this perception that plant variety rights is something for big companies only, which very clearly it is not. I think also it is important to make people aware that of the benefits of the innovation that we protect with plant variety rights, and the importance of this innovation if we want to be able to continue putting food on our tables in the coming decades, in view of climate change and other issues.
This leads me to the next question, the next decades. You look back at the last 25 years and provide a picture. At the end of the study, do you think you will be able to tell us what the future holds in terms of economic trends in relation to plant variety rights?
Well, I cannot really predict anything in terms of numbers or anything like that. But I think just following up on what we have been discussing, knowing that the world is going through climate change, knowing that population in many parts of the world, maybe not in Europe or Asia, but certainly in Africa and other parts of the world that are very much affected by climate change, that population in those places is growing. So there is more mouths to feed in the coming years. So all this makes innovation in plant breeding even more important than it has been in the past. And I think this importance will not only increase. That I think I can say with confidence.
Of course, looking into the future is a bit difficult, and we can say that we glance into the crystal ball of the future. We can be optimistic, of course. We can look at several examples of future-proof varieties. We get this evidence. We receive applications for these varieties. These varieties are able not only to guarantee to farmers and growers higher yields, because at the end of the day, farming is an economic activity and they have to receive a stable and appropriate level of revenues to live out of it. And also, as you said, Nathan, living in Spain, but the situation is not only in Spain, in the region where you are, but also in other regions of Europe where our crops are constantly facing biotic and abiotic stresses, such as the high temperature in summer and very low temperature sometimes in winter, and lack of water. So these are factors that cannot be underestimated for the future of the sector and to guarantee food security. So innovation remains crucial. Innovations does not mean not allowing the use of traditional knowledge or traditional varieties. We have to make sure that we guarantee a very rich toolkit where the farmers can choose from. And that's essential for the future. Anybody can choose what is best for their conditions under their environment in their specific region. And for this reason, it's very important that SMEs more typically are very much linked to territories. And if they continue innovating and they are linked to the necessity, to the needs, to the demand of the territories, we can guarantee better output. Just to give you an example, recently we went to the south of Italy, to a region which is very known for the production of table grapes, Puglia, and we learned of, for example, public-private partnership in making available to local producers adapted varieties, which would be also more beneficial for the local production and also exports to other regions. So you see, we see more and more of these, let's say, cases where breeders can partner with local producers. I saw also another example like this in not far from Alicante, in Murcia, really close to your place, where the necessity of putting together the research, which often is guaranteed by a public research institute, and a community of local producers who are willing to invest and to put money to foster the creation of new varieties that are fit for their environment.
in doing this work with CPVO, I've become a big fan of plant variety rights, and I continue to read about them and to follow them. For example, the recent proposals on new genomic techniques that are in the works and so on. So for me personally, this has been a very, very gratifying experience to work together with CPVO on this study.
Thank you. The same here.
Well, and I think this concludes our episode today. Big thank you to our guest, Nathan, to our president, Francesco, and see you next time.